I walked into Everly & Co. Bridal in Charleston carrying my sister's oversized designer tote like a pack mule. The place smelled like expensive perfume and steamed satin. Soft music played over the speakers while a row of gowns glittered under bright lights. Bridesmaids whispered over racks of lace and champagne-colored tulle. I was the only one in army boots under all that sparkle. My sister Vanessa was standing on the little stage in front of a wall of mirrors like she was auditioning for royalty. She twirled in a crystal-covered gown while our mother Diane clapped and told her she looked stunning. The sales staff hovered around her like she was a celebrity. Nobody even looked at me, except when they needed something fetched. Vanessa snapped her fingers. "Corinne, Vale, the one with the beads. Hurry up, you're so slow." Her voice carried across the boutique. I bit down on the inside of my cheek. Being barked at in formation never bothered me, but being ordered around by my little sister in a wedding dress did. I grabbed the veil from the rack and walked back toward her platform. She didn't even glance at me. "Here," I said, keeping my tone even. She spun, her eyes cutting into mine. Then she slapped me across the face hard enough to sting. It echoed. The room went silent except for a few gasps. One of the cousins dropped her phone. Vanessa's voice sliced through the pause. "Just leave. You're ruining my moment." She turned back toward the mirror, lifting her chin like nothing happened. Heat shot up my neck. My face burned, but I stayed still. Years of training had taught me how to keep my cool under pressure, but it didn't stop the humiliation from crawling under my skin. People stared, then pretended not to. The sales clerk shifted from foot to foot. My mother looked away. Nobody said a word. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I simply set the veil on the edge of the platform and walked out, the door chime tinkling as if this were just another shopping trip. Outside, the cool Charleston air hit my cheek where her hand had landed. I stood under the awning for a second, breathing in the smell of street coffee and exhaust, my hands shaking even though my head was clear. What no one inside that boutique knew, not my sister, not my mother, not the eager staff, was that the entire fantasy they were clapping for was sitting on my credit card. Months of combat pay and re-enlistment bonus had gone straight from my army account into deposits for her dress, the venue, the caterer, the flowers, even the flights for out-of-town relatives. I'd been covering for everyone quietly while working double shifts and saving scraps for myself. The one day I took off from base to help her shop turned into a public slap in the face. I pulled my phone from my pocket, thumbed open my banking app, and stared at the numbers. Her dream wedding was still on my dime. She was inside waving around a piece of plastic she thought was magically loaded with family money. It wasn't. It was my name, my savings, my future. I scrolled to the account settings and hit Lock Card. A red banner appeared. Card blocked. Transactions declined. No drama, no fireworks, just a button tap. Years of military training had made me good at decisive action. My pulse slowed a little as I slid the phone back into my pocket. Through the window, I could still see Vanessa at the counter with the dress draped over her arms. Her face was flushed, her voice sharp as she told the clerk to run it again. Mom stood behind her whispering about calling the bank. The manager folded his arms, clearly unimpressed. They'd seen brides like her before, the kind who think everything will bend to them. I almost laughed. My phone buzzed. Notification. Transaction declined $20,350. Everly & Co. Bridal. I smirked. That had to be the gown. I leaned against the brick wall outside, feeling the sting on my cheek fade. Inside, Vanessa kept waving the card like it was a magic wand. Another decline. Her voice pitched higher. A group of shoppers glanced over at her meltdown. The manager said something I couldn't hear and gestured at the dress. Vanessa's jaw dropped like a queen stripped of her crown. She turned to Mom, demanding she fix it. Mom's eyes flicked toward the door, probably wondering where I'd gone. I stepped farther down the sidewalk, letting the boutique door swing shut behind me. For the first time in years, my shoulders felt a fraction lighter. My phone buzzed again with another decline charge, then another. It vibrated like a drumbeat in my pocket. I started walking toward my truck parked down the street. The Charleston sun glared off the hood. My boots clicked on the pavement, the sound steady, familiar. People passed by holding iced coffee, carrying shopping bags. None of them had any idea a whole wedding fantasy was collapsing a few feet away. As I reached the crosswalk, another notification popped up. Balance overdue. Maplewood Manor will cancel reservation in 48 hours if payment not received. I almost laughed out loud. It would soon land in Vanessa's inbox instead. I stopped at the curb and looked back at the boutique one last time. Behind the glass, Vanessa was still arguing, Mom was on her phone, the sales staff were starting to lose patience. The crystal gown glinted under the lights like a prize slipping through her fingers. My cheek still tingled where she'd hit me, but it wasn't fear or shame anymore. It was something colder, steadier. I opened my notes app and typed a quick reminder to call my unit's admin office about my leave paperwork. If there was one thing the Army taught me, it was to take care of business on time. Vanessa had no idea the ground under her was about to give way, and for once, I wasn't going to catch her when she fell. I crossed the street, the sound of horns and gulls filling the air. Another buzz from my phone. Caterer, payment overdue. They were already lining up. I slipped the phone back into my pocket and kept walking. My boots felt solid on the pavement. I didn't speed up. I didn't slow down. I just kept moving. The boutique shrinking behind me. The Charleston skyline ahead. The slap still echoed, but it didn't shake me. All it did was flip a switch I should have flipped a long time ago. The hum of traffic faded as I turned down a side street and slid into my truck. My hands steadied on the steering wheel. I started the engine, the low rumble grounding me. Without thinking, I reached into the glove compartment and pulled out a crumpled stack of receipts, venue deposits, catering invoices, plane tickets. They were all in my name. The corners were worn from being stuffed into my uniform pockets on base. Looking at them now, I wondered why I had kept them. Maybe to remind myself it wasn't magic money like Vanessa thought. It was sweat, hours, and sand in my boots. I threw the stack back and stared out the windshield. The last few years flickered in my head like a muted newsreel. Long flights into Kabul, sleeping in tents with 20 other people, pulling double guard shifts and using the extra pay to wire money home. My re-enlistment bonus hit my account, and within a week it was gone, split into deposits for Vanessa's engagement party, down payment on Maplewood Manor, a photographer she had to have. Every month I watched my balance drop while listening to her talk about our parents' generosity. I never corrected her. Back then, I told myself it was temporary, that she'd pay me back, that family was supposed to help family. I'd go back to base. She'd send texts full of hearts and, "You're the best big sis." And I'd transfer another lump sum. When I got promoted to sergeant, I didn't celebrate. I used the back pay to cover her bachelorette trip to Miami. She posted photos of cocktails and yachts. I sat in a plywood office, filling out supply requests. Now my phone buzzed again with another payment overdue notice. I watched the screen for a second and then let it go dark. My own rent on base was paid. My car was paid off. My credit was still good because I hadn't missed a bill yet. But my savings account was a skeleton. I had been funding a wedding I wasn't even invited to sit at as a guest. Vanessa told me I could help greet people at the door instead. That was when I stopped pretending it was normal. I shifted into drive and pulled onto the road, the Charleston skyline fading behind me. My cheek didn't sting anymore. It felt almost numb. I rolled down the window and let the humid air hit my face. There was no one to tell what I'd just done. No one from my unit knew how deep I'd gotten into my family's mess. When we were deployed, guys joked about sending money home like it was a badge of honor. I never said mine was for a wedding dress. A light turned red ahead and I stopped, drumming my fingers on the steering wheel. The sound reminded me of the barracks at night when I'd scroll through my phone transferring money, telling myself it was fine. I remembered the first time she asked me to pay a deposit. "Just a small favor," she'd said. It wasn't small, but I wired it anyway. After that, the requests kept coming wrapped in, "You're the only one we can count on." I wasn't dumb. I knew the numbers. I knew how long it took to earn every dollar in a uniform under a burning Sunday. I just ignored the knot in my stomach because I thought it was my job to keep everything afloat. In my head, I heard the voices from leadership classes. Discipline is holding the line. Somehow I held the line everywhere except at home. The light turned green. I drove toward a stretch of marsh where the road opened up and the water reflected the sky. My phone buzzed again with a call from my mother. I let it go to voicemail. She'd probably be furious, asking what happened to the card, telling me I embarrassed them. The thought didn't even make my pulse jump this time. I turned onto a quieter road, pulled into a small park by the water, and parked under a live oak. The air smelled of salt and mud. I sat there for a long moment with the engine off, feeling the quiet press in. A jogger passed by with earbuds. Somewhere, a dog barked. Normal life moved on while a whole wedding imploded a few miles away. I opened my phone again, scrolled through the list of payments. The numbers were so clear now. 20,000 for the dress, 10 for the venue deposit, another 8 for catering, 4 for flowers, 2 for the engagement dinner, 3 for the bachelorette weekend. On and on it went. I could have bought a house. Instead, I had bought a fantasy for someone who slapped me in public. A part of me wanted to feel regret for locking the card, but nothing came. What I felt was a strange calm, the kind that hits right after you've finally done the thing you've been avoiding. It wasn't revenge in the dramatic sense. It was just stopping. It was a line finally held. I thumbed over to my leave paperwork, double-checking the dates. 2 more weeks of leave, enough time to clear my head before reporting back for ranger assessment. I'd been putting that packet together quietly, not telling anyone at home. If I got in, it would mean longer training, more deployments, but also a step up. A way out of this endless cycle of being the family wallet. I locked the screen and leaned back. The tree overhead rustled. Across the water, boats moved slowly, their wakes trailing behind them. My phone vibrated again, a text from Vanessa this time. Card's not working. Call me now. Then another. This isn't funny. I'm at the counter. Everyone's watching. Then a third. You better fix this. I put the phone face down on the passenger seat. I wasn't going to fix it. Not anymore. The hum of insects rose and fell. I watched a crab skitter across the mud and disappear into a hole. Somewhere behind me, a radio played a country song about coming home. I almost laughed at the irony. Coming home wasn't supposed to feel like a battlefield, but here I was, sitting in my truck, planning my next move like a mission. I reached into the back seat and grabbed my duffel bag. Inside was my uniform, neatly folded, boots polished, habit. Even on leave, I kept it ready. My fingers brushed over the patch on the sleeve. For years, I'd been proud to send money home, thinking it meant I was doing something noble. Now it just felt like a weight I'd been carrying without noticing. The phone buzzed again. Another message from Vanessa popped up on the lock screen. The manager is asking for the dress back. Mom's freaking out. Call me now. I watched the words fade, then disappear as the screen went dark. I started the engine again, the sound breaking the stillness. My hands felt steady on the wheel. There was nothing dramatic about it. No speech, no big plan. Just a quiet decision made and carried out. Pulling out of the park, I merged back onto the main road, passing a billboard for a chain restaurant advertising, "Family meals, all you can eat." I snorted. Family meals. Sure. Ahead, the highway stretched out toward Fort Bragg. The sun broke through the clouds, glare hitting the windshield. My cheek no longer burned, my jaw unclenched. I didn't think about the boutique or the stairs or the slap. I just drove, the phone silent now, the city sliding by as if nothing had happened. A gust of warm air rushed into the cab as I cracked the window and tossed the empty coffee cup into a trash bin at the gas station. The engine idled while my phone lit up again. The screen showed a cascade of notifications. Transaction declined, Everly & Co., balance overdue, Maplewood Manor, payment overdue, Charleston Catering. They came one after another like small explosions. I swiped them away without opening. Somewhere downtown, Vanessa was still inside the boutique. I pictured her trying to keep her voice low at first, then snapping at the clerk as the card refused to go through. I knew that look she got when she didn't get her way. Eyes wide, jaw tight, voice rising until everyone turned to stare. Our mother would be standing behind her, whispering about family embarrassment while reaching for her phone. The phone vibrated again. This time, an incoming call from Diane. I let it ring. After a moment it stopped, then started again immediately. I answered before it hit voicemail just to end the buzzing. "Corinne!" Her voice was sharp enough to cut glass. "What did you do? Do you know your sister's dress was declined? She's standing here humiliated. Everyone is looking at us." I kept my tone flat. "That's not my problem." "What do you mean it's not your problem? You embarrassed us. You better call the bank right now and fix it." "There's nothing to fix. That was my card. I've been paying for everything. Her dress, her engagement, dinner, the deposit for the venue. Every single thing she's bragging about is on my dime." Silence filled the line. only broken by muffled voices on her end. Then Diane's voice came back, trembling but angry. "You selfish girl. How dare you cancel the card right before the wedding?" I let out a small, bitter laugh. Selfish? I've been funding a wedding that isn't even mine. I've drained my savings while she treats me like a maid. Do you even realize what I've sacrificed? Another voice cut in, shrill and frantic. Vanessa had grabbed the phone. "You're jealous. That's what this is. You've always been jealous of me. You think ruining my wedding will make you happy? Guess what? It won't. Everyone will still choose me over you." I didn't raise my voice. "From now on, Vanessa, you fund your own wedding. Consider this my final gift to you." I hung up and dropped the phone onto the passenger seat. The gas pump clicked off. I replaced it and slid back into the driver's seat, my hands steady on the wheel. Outside the windshield, a family walked toward the convenience store laughing, their kids holding slushies. Ordinary life rolled on. I pulled back onto the road, notifications still stacking up on my phone. Another declined charge at Everly & Co., another overdue notice from the florist. I turned the volume up on the radio to drown out the buzzing. Classic rock filled the cab, something about breaking free. Images of the boutique floated back. Vanessa waving the card, the clerk's blank expression, the manager crossing his arms. She'd been so sure the money would always be there. For months, she'd been spending like she had a bottomless account, thinking our parents were covering it all. Now she'd have to look at the truth in front of an audience. A red light stopped me at an intersection. I rested my forearms on the steering wheel. Across the street, a group of Marines in uniform were coming out of a sandwich shop, laughing, punching each other's shoulders. They looked free, light. I remembered sitting in dusty tents, transferring money from the same phone I held now. The contrast was almost comical. The light turned green and I drove on. The phone buzzed again with a text from a cousin. "Hey, is it true the wedding is off?" Heard the caterer pulled out. Another from an aunt. "Maplewood Manor is calling about unpaid balance. What's happening?" I didn't answer either. Up ahead, the road curved along the marsh. I slowed and rolled the window down, the scent of salt water and mud washing in. My cheek no longer ached. Instead, there was a faint satisfaction in the air, not gloating, just clarity. I pictured Vanessa at that counter, her voice rising. "Run it again. There must be money on that card." The manager, polite but firm, explaining store policy. Our mother on the phone with me, demanding I fix it. Everyone in the boutique slowly realizing the bride had no way to pay for the gown she'd already posted about online. My phone buzzed again with another email alert. Charleston Catering, check returned. Vendors were lining up like dominoes falling. It wasn't me pulling strings. It was gravity finally doing its job. I reached a pull-off near the water and parked. My reflection stared back from the dark screen of my phone. I turned it face down. Across the marsh, birds wheeled and dove. A breeze rattled the dry grass. It struck me how quiet my own head felt. No calculations, no justifications, no telling myself, just one more payment. The decision had been made with a tap of my thumb, and now the fallout belonged to someone else. A memory flashed. Last month on base, a buddy joking, "Man, you're always wiring money home. Your sister better name her first kid after you." I'd laughed along. None of them knew it was true. My phone vibrated again, persistent. "Vanessa. Caterer canceled. Venue threatening to cancel. Answer me now." Then another from Diane. "You're destroying this family. Call me back." I let them pile up. Through the windshield, the sky widened, pale blue streaked with clouds. A shrimp boat moved slowly across the water. The world outside the screen kept going. I started the truck again and eased back onto the road. The radio played an ad for a wedding expo coming to town. I snorted and turned the volume down. My hands felt solid on the wheel. As the highway opened up, I passed a billboard for Fort Bragg, home of the airborne. My eyes flicked to it, then back to the road. In 2 weeks, I'd be back there for ranger assessment, pushing myself harder than ever. That was my future. What was collapsing in Charleston behind me was not. The phone buzzed once more. Another notification scrolled across the screen. "Maplewood Manor. Reservation will be canceled within 48 hours if balance not received." I didn't tap it. I didn't need to. The truck rolled on, tires humming against the asphalt, the marshland sliding past. A faint smile tugged at the corner of my mouth. For years, I'd been the quiet one, the reliable one, the one who kept everything running. Now, for the first time, the weight was shifting off my shoulders without me lifting a finger. I adjusted the rearview mirror, the sun low and sharp behind me. Ahead, the road stretched straight, the air heavy with the smell of salt and diesel. The notifications stopped buzzing for a moment. My hands tightened on the steering wheel, steady and calm, as I drove on. I pulled into the driveway of the small rental I'd taken for my leave and killed the engine. The quiet hit me first. No chatter, no orders, no humming refrigerators like on base. Just cicadas and the distant whir of a lawnmower somewhere down the block. I grabbed my duffel from the passenger seat and headed inside, boots thudding softly on the steps. The house smelled faintly of paint and old wood, still unfamiliar but mine for now. My phone lit up before I'd even set the bag down. 10 missed calls from Mom, 5 from Vanessa, 2 from Dad. A dozen texts stacked up on the lock screen like warning lights. I thumbed one open. Mom, Robert says you've gone too far. Call us now. Another from Vanessa. You're going to pay for this. We'll sue if we have to. Dad, you're tearing this family apart. I tossed the phone on the table and went to the kitchen sink, filling a glass with water. The cold ran over my fingers before I drank. The same routine I'd done after patrols overseas: wash hands, drink, breathe. The difference was there'd been an actual mission then, not a wedding invoice. The phone buzzed again. I picked it up and hit speaker. Dad's voice came through heavy and hard. Corinne, what the hell are you doing? Your sister's crying. Your mother's hysterical. The vendors are calling us. They say you canceled payments. Fix this before it's too late. I leaned against the counter, voice steady. There's nothing to fix. I'm not paying anymore. You made commitments. He snapped. No. I sent money quietly when you asked. Every deposit, every dinner, every dress. Not one of those contracts is in my name. You and Vanessa signed them or your names are on them. I'm done. A sharp intake of breath on the line. We raised you better than this. You're supposed to be the responsible one. I am being responsible, I said, keeping my tone flat. For my own life for once. There was a pause. Then his voice dropped to a low growl. If you think you can humiliate this family and walk away. I didn't humiliate anyone, I cut in. I just stopped funding a lie. 1. The line went silent except for a faint echo of voices in the background. Then a click. Call ended. I set the phone down and exhaled through my nose. Years of saying yes had built a wall around me. One no and it was as if I detonated a charge. I rinsed the glass and put it on the counter, then opened my duffel and pulled out my running shoes. I needed the road under my feet more than another argument. Outside, the evening heat pressed down. I laced up and started at a steady jog through the quiet neighborhood. Houses blurred past flags fluttering on porches, sprinklers ticking in arcs over front lawns. My muscles settled into rhythm. In my head, I saw flashbacks of childhood summers. Vanessa asking for toys, me handing mine over, parents smiling at her as if generosity was my job. It had seemed normal then. Now it felt like a script I'd been handed without my consent. I turned a corner and pushed my pace, lungs pulling in the heavy air. On base, we'd run in formation, boots slapping pavement in unison. Here, it was just me and the sound of my breath. The knot in my chest loosened a little with each stride. My phone vibrated against my hip in the running pouch. I ignored it. When I finally slowed to a walk, sweat running down my temples, I pulled it out. Another message from Vanessa. You've ruined everything. I'll see you in court if you don't fix this by tomorrow. Another from Mom. The caterer canceled. Relatives are asking what's happening. This is all on you. I wiped sweat from my forehead with the back of my hand. Threats of court made me almost laugh. There was no contract with my name on it. I'd sent money voluntarily. They could scream all they wanted. They couldn't make me open my account again. I walked back toward the house, the streetlights flickering on. Kids played basketball in a driveway. A dog barked from behind a fence. The ordinary scene felt like a different planet compared to the hysteria vibrating through my phone. Inside, I peeled off my shoes and sat at the small kitchen table. I scrolled through my email. A message from Charleston Catering. Your check has been returned. Please remit payment within 24 hours or contract will be canceled. Another from Maplewood Manor. Final notice, unpaid balance. Another from the florist, contract void. They were all addressed to Vanessa or my parents, But because I'd been the one paying, the vendors had k'd me. I clicked each open and read calmly. No rush of guilt anymore, no scramble to transfer funds. Just facts. No payment, no service. I closed the laptop and pushed it aside. A memory surfaced from last deployment. We'd been pinned down by a sudden dust storm and had to hunker in the dark until it passed. One of the guys had joked, "Sometimes you don't fight the storm, you let it blow itself out." That's what this felt like now. A storm they'd built with my money was blowing itself out. I poured another glass of water and drank slowly. The phone buzzed again, but I didn't reach for it. I let the sound fill the room until it stopped. Through the window, the street glowed under the sodium lamps. Across the way, a neighbor sat on his porch smoking, scrolling his phone. Everything ordinary. I thought about the training run I'd just done. The steady pace, the way my breathing fell into rhythm. For the first time in years, there was no new invoice waiting for me at the finish line. I grabbed a towel from the counter and wiped my face. The clock on the stove ticked softly. In 2 weeks, I'd be back at Fort Bragg, in uniform, doing something that actually mattered. The contrast to this kitchen full of buzzing messages couldn't be sharper. I moved to the window and leaned against the frame, looking out at the quiet street. The glow from inside cast my reflection faintly on the glass. Short hair, strong shoulders, a faint red mark still visible on my cheek. It didn't look like someone who'd just been threatened with lawsuits. It looked like someone who'd finally stopped being used. The phone lit up again with a new text from Vanessa. "Derek is asking questions now. You're ruining my life." I watched the message fade. The house stayed quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator. I let my hands rest on the sill, cool against my palms. Out on the street, the lawnmower had stopped. The cicadas buzzed louder in the silence. Somewhere a TV played a game show through an open window, life going on without me needing to fund it. I stayed there a moment longer, the phone still blinking on the table, and drew a slow breath through my nose. The air smelled faintly of cut grass and summer heat. My shoulders dropped an inch. Nothing dramatic. Just the first quiet evening I'd had in a long time without reaching for my wallet. The next morning I woke to sunlight cutting across the kitchen table and the smell of coffee drifting from the pot I'd set on a timer. My phone was already vibrating where I'd left it. I poured a mug and sat down, scrolling through the notifications without opening them. Contract canceled, magnolia flowers. Final notice, coastal photography. Payment overdue, Low Country String Quartet. Each one was addressed to Vanessa or my parents but copied to me, as if the vendors sensed who had been footing the bill. I sipped the coffee and stared at the stack of messages. This was no longer one failed payment. It was a chain reaction. Every company that had believed the checks would clear was now backing away. I pictured the florist pulling orders, the photographer erasing dates from her calendar, the musicians booking another event instead. Quiet, efficient, no drama, just business. My phone buzzed again with a string of texts from relatives. "Is the wedding still on? We already booked flights. Heard the venue is canceling, what's going on?" I set the mug down and rubbed my temples. I hadn't answered any of them yet. It wasn't my job to explain. Boots on, I stepped outside into the humid morning and jogged down to the small community gym I'd scouted the day before. A handful of retirees were on the treadmills watching cable news. I found an empty lane at the indoor range in the back. The smell of gun oil hit me as I unpacked my pistol from its case. Sliding on ear protection felt almost like sliding back into uniform. I loaded, aimed, and squeezed off a few rounds, each shot echoing sharp in the enclosed space. The rhythm steadied my breathing. Out here, no one cared about who paid for what or who slapped who. Targets didn't lie. They didn't throw tantrums. They either hit or they didn't. When I finished, I cleared my weapon and packed it up, hands steady. Sweat dampened the back of my shirt, but my head felt clearer. On the way out, I caught my reflection in a mirror by the water fountain hair pulled back, eyes focused. Not a bridesmaid, not a bank account, a soldier on leave. Back at the house, my phone was lit up like a signal flare. Vanessa. The caterer says contract void. Do something now. Another. People in the family chat are asking questions. Answer them. Mom, you've embarrassed us enough. Fix this. Dad, you're making a scene. Think about your reputation. I placed the phone face down on the table and poured another mug of coffee. The clock ticked on the wall. Across the street, a man loaded tools into a pickup, whistling. Ordinary. An hour later, a cousin called. I let it go to voicemail. Her message came through after, "Derek's family is asking why nothing's been paid. We all thought your parents were covering. What's going on?" I opened my laptop and checked my bank account out of habit. For once, the number hadn't dropped overnight. It sat there, still low but not bleeding. It felt like looking at a wound finally scabbed over. Another email came in from Maplewood Manor. Reservation will be canceled within 24 hours if payment not received. They had also copied Derek's parents. The ripple was spreading. I closed the laptop and leaned back. The kitchen smelled of coffee and cut grass from outside. My hands rested on the table, palms flat. This wasn't a plan. It was simply the absence of one. For years, I'd been the safety net. Now gravity was doing its work. The phone buzzed with a new text from Derek himself. "Can you call me? Need to clarify something." I stared at the message but didn't type a reply. Not yet. I went to the fridge, pulled out leftover chicken, and ate it cold over the sink. The simple act of eating my own food, without thinking about someone else's bills, felt strange. Through the window, I could see kids riding bikes, the sun already high. My boots were still dusty from the range. The patch on my duffel caught the light airborne wings. I ran a thumb over it, remembering the last jump, the rush of air and noise, the moment before landing. Everything sharp, real, immediate. My phone chimed again. "Vanessa, I'm not kidding, Derek is mad. Fix this or he's gone." Another from Mom. "We didn't raise you to be cruel." Another from Dad. "Family comes first, always has." I placed the phone back on the table, screen down. The cicadas outside hummed louder in the midday heat. Somewhere a dog barked. I opened the window and let the humid air roll in. My cheek had lost its faint red mark. My hands no longer trembled when I scrolled. I wasn't thinking about revenge. I was thinking about breakfast, training, paperwork. The rest was noise. Another email popped up on the laptop screen. "Returned check. Magnolia flowers." I clicked it open, skimmed the text, closed it. Vendors pulling out one by one. Quiet and final. I went back to the duffel and pulled out my Ranger assessment packet. Double-checked the forms, the dates, 2 weeks left of leave. The training schedule was tucked neatly inside. A car pulled into the driveway next door. Neighbors chatting, unloading groceries. Normal life. I poured the last of the coffee and sat again at the table. The phone buzzed with another message from Derek. "Need to talk." It sat there glowing against the wood. I took a slow sip from the mug and watched the steam rise. The kitchen clock ticked. Outside, the shadows shifted across the lawn. My breathing matched the rhythm of the clock, steady and even. I glanced at the screen once more. The message from Derek still waited, unanswered. The mug was warm in my hands. The air smelled of salt and summer heat drifting in through the open window. My shoulders stayed level. The phone buzzed again, insistent, but my hands didn't move. I held the mug, felt the heat seep into my palms, and let the sound fade into the background of the day. The phone buzzed yet again, and this time Derek's name stayed on the screen longer, vibrating across the table until it nearly tipped off the edge. I caught it before it fell and pressed answer without putting it on speaker. His voice came through low and strained. "Corinne, I need to know the truth. Did you really pay for the wedding? The venue, the food, the engagement, dinner, all of it?" I leaned back in the chair, staring at the ceiling. "Yes, every bit of it. Vanessa hasn't paid a dime. Our parents haven't either. It's been me." He was silent for a beat, then another. I could hear movement on his end, maybe pacing. "She told me her family was handling everything. She swore money wasn't an issue. Do you know how humiliating it was to find out in front of my parents that none of the payments were real?" My tone stayed calm. "I didn't ask to be her banker. I just wanted to help until it became impossible." "I trusted her," Derek said, his voice cracking just slightly. "But lying about something this big money, the wedding makes me wonder what else she's lied about." Before I could answer, there was a shuffle, and then Vanessa's voice burst through the line, high and sharp. "Derek, don't listen to her. She's jealous. She's always hated me. She's trying to destroy us." Derek's voice cut in, colder now. Enough, Vanessa. I saw the receipts. I'm not stupid. You told me your parents were paying, and now I find out it was your sister's savings. How could you think that was okay? I was going to pay her back, she cried. You don't understand. She's making this worse than it is. I understand perfectly, Derek said. We're about to start a marriage built on lies. Vanessa's voice rose to a shriek. She's poisoning you against me. She wants to ruin my wedding because she's bitter. I sat quietly, letting the noise run its course. Derek didn't sound like a man being poisoned. He sounded like a man waking up. Finally, he spoke again, directly to me. Corinne, thank you for telling me the truth. Then the line clicked dead. I set the phone down, the kitchen suddenly too quiet. Outside, a truck rumbled past and a dog barked at it. My pulse stayed steady. I picked up my mug and drained the last of the cold coffee. For a moment, I thought about calling one of my friends from base, but then decided against it. There was nothing to explain. I moved to the sink and washed the cup slowly, the sound of water steady against porcelain. Across the street, a neighbor watered his lawn, the arc of the sprinkler catching sunlight. Ordinary. My phone buzzed again. A string of texts from Vanessa filled the screen, each one more frantic than the last. You're ruining my life. He's furious. Fix this. I swear I'll sue. Everyone will hate you for this. I put the phone face down on the counter and walked to the living room. My duffel sat open where I'd left it, uniform folded inside. I checked the paperwork again for the ranger assessment, making sure everything was in order. The dates lined up, signatures done. 2 weeks, and I'd be back at Fort Bragg. Another vibration rattled the phone. This time a voicemail from Derek's mother popped up. We just learned it was your money. I'm so sorry for the misunderstanding. No anger, just quiet shock. I sat down at the table again and opened my laptop. Emails poured in from vendors now CCing Derek's family as well. Cancelled contracts, unpaid balances, returned checks. The whole house of cards was visible to everyone. I scrolled through them calmly, closing each one after reading. Outside, the sun slid lower, turning the street gold. A breeze carried the smell of cut grass through the open window. I let it fill my lungs. My phone chimed once more. Another text from Vanessa. He's threatening to call off the wedding. This is your fault. Do you hear me? Your fault. I typed back one word. No. Then locked the screen. The neighbor across the way called his kids in for dinner. A lawnmower started up somewhere. Normal life rolled on while the chaos inside my phone reached a fever pitch. I got up, pulled my running shoes on again, and headed outside. The sky was streaked pink and orange now. I started jogging down the block, each step steady. At the end of the street, I turned onto a dirt trail that ran along the marsh. The smell of salt water rose up and gulls cried overhead. With every stride, my mind cleared. The years of quiet transfers, of pretending it was fine, of telling myself family meant always saying yes. All of it loosened like a knot. My boots had walked across deserts and flight lines, carried gear heavier than some of my fellow soldiers. This weight was lighter than that, but it had been constant. I slowed at a bend where the trail opened onto a small pier and leaned on the railing, looking out at the water. My phone buzzed again, but I didn't check it. The tide moved in slow ripples, reflecting the fading sky. A memory rose. Sitting in a plywood office overseas, wiring money on a cracked phone screen while Vanessa texted about cake tastings. I remembered thinking, if this helps her be happy, it's worth it. Now she was screaming threats about lawsuits. I drew a long breath and let it out. The air smelled of brine and pine. My shoulders loosened. Turning back, I jogged toward the house, the sky deepening to purple. Porch lights blinked on. The sound of crickets replaced the gulls. My lungs burned pleasantly from the run. When I walked inside, the kitchen lights were soft against the darkening windows. My phone sat on the counter blinking. I didn't reach for it right away. Instead, I filled a glass of water, drank it slowly, and set it down. Only then did I glance at the screen. Derek had texted again. We're done. No punctuation. Just 2 words. I placed the phone face down without replying. The refrigerator hummed. Outside, a car door slammed and someone laughed. Inside, the air held still, thick with the smell of sweat and salt from my run. I went to the window and looked out at the street. The porch lights across the way cast long shadows. The red mark on my cheek was gone now. My reflection in the glass looked like someone who had finally stopped flinching. The phone stayed silent for a long moment, before buzzing once more, another notification sliding across the screen. I let it sit there, glowing faintly against the counter, as the room settled into quiet around me. I let the glass rest on the counter and walked into the living room, the hum of the fridge fading behind me. The phone blinked again with new notifications. Group chat messages from cousins scrolled across the screen like a stock ticker. Is the wedding still on? Just landed in Charleston, where do we go? Heard Derek called it off, what's going on? They weren't accusations yet, just confusion. Through the window, headlights swept across the street as relatives from out of town pulled up to rented houses. Their voices carried faintly as they unloaded luggage. The buzz in my pocket didn't stop. Mom calling again. Dad leaving another voicemail. Vanessa firing off texts so fast they overlapped. You're killing me. Everyone's here. Fix this. I set the phone face down and laced up my sneakers. The sun was low, throwing long shadows across the porch. I stepped outside and started walking down the block. The evening air smelled of grill smoke and cut grass. Kids rode bikes, their parents calling them in for dinner. Ordinary life moved like nothing was happening. Half a mile later, I reached a small park by the marsh and sat on a bench under an oak. The breeze off the water cooled my skin. I opened the phone, not to answer but to read. Vanessa. They're all asking me what's going on. I told them you sabotaged me. Mom, please come talk to us. People are whispering. Dad, if you have any decency left, you'll fix this mess. I scrolled further. A cousin had posted in the family chat. Vendors are saying checks bounced. Who was paying for all this? Another replied, not the parents? A third, if Corinne was, that's insane. I locked the screen and slipped the phone back into my pocket. The tree above creaked in the wind. Across the water, a boat engine droned. I sat still, breathing evenly, feeling the bench under my palms. On base, we were taught about boundaries, physical lines, clear instructions, what you're responsible for, and what you're not. At home, there had never been a line. Money, time, patience, it all blurred into one endless yes. The slap at the boutique had been a physical line I hadn't even planned. The card lock was just following through. Another vibration. This time a direct message from Derek. Vanessa's telling people you're lying. I've seen the receipts. Thank you for being honest. Short, factual. I read it twice and put the phone away. I stood, stretched my legs, and began walking back toward the house. The sky was streaked with red now, streetlights winking on one by one. Cars lined the curb in front of the rental houses' license plates from Georgia, Florida, North Carolina. Relatives unloading garment bags and coolers, checking their phones, whispering. At my driveway, I paused. Across the street, 2 aunts were standing by their car, speaking in low tones. One of them glanced at me and looked away quickly. I went inside, shut the door, and leaned against it for a second. The smell of the house fresh paint and faint detergent wrapped around me. I dropped my keys on the table and opened the laptop. Emails from vendors kept rolling in. Final cancellation notice from the string quartet. Returned check from the photographer. Maplewood Manor had CC'd Derek's parents again. Every domino was visible in real time. The phone buzzed once more. This time, a text from Mom. Come over to the house. We need to talk before tomorrow. Your father says you should help one last time. I stared at the message. My thumb hovered over the keyboard. Then I typed back. No. Nothing else. Sent. For a few seconds, nothing happened. Then another from Mom. Please. You're destroying your sister's life. Another from Dad. Think about the family's reputation. I set the phone down and walked to the kitchen sink. The glass I'd used earlier still sat there with a ring of water at the bottom. I rinsed it, set it in the drying rack, and wiped my hands on a towel. Simple, quiet movements that felt more real than the hysteria vibrating through my phone. Outside, voices drifted from the street. Relatives greeting each other, asking about hotels. A door slammed. Luggage wheels rattled over pavement. The low murmur of speculation grew like a swarm. I walked to the window and looked out. A car door opened across the street, and Derek stepped out with his parents. He looked like a man carrying a heavy pack. His mother's expression was tight. They disappeared into the rental house without glancing my way. Back inside, I sat at the table, opened my ranger paperwork again, and reviewed the training schedule. My pen tapped against the paper. The steady sound cut through the muffled noise from outside. The phone vibrated once more, a new message from Vanessa. "If you don't fix this, I'll sue you for everything. You can't just walk away." Another followed immediately. "Everyone will side with me. You're going to regret this." I laid the phone face down and pressed my palms together. My heartbeat stayed slow. There was no adrenaline now, just clarity. Through the window, the street had grown darker, only porch lights and car headlights slicing through. I could hear children being called in, doors closing, footsteps on wooden stairs. Life winding down into evening. I stood and stretched, feeling the muscles in my back loosen. The air inside the house was still and warm. I moved to the counter, poured another glass of water, and drank it slowly. The phone buzzed again, but I didn't pick it up. My hands rested on the edge of the counter, cool under my palms. Outside, the crickets had started, their sound steady like a metronome. In the distance, a faint murmur of conversation drifted from the rental houses where my relatives had gathered. Words I couldn't make out, a tone of confusion and speculation. I let it wash over me without reacting. I turned off the kitchen light and walked into the living room, the glow from the street filtering through the blinds. My duffel sat by the wall, uniform neatly folded inside. I brushed a speck of dust off the patch. The fabric felt solid under my fingers. The phone blinked once more on the table, screen lighting the room briefly. I glanced at it without reaching. Vanessa's name glowed bright, another string of words spilling across the notification bar before fading. The refrigerator hummed, the only steady sound. I sat down on the couch, elbows on knees, and stared at the floorboards. The wood was warm from the day's Sunday. My breathing slowed, deep and even. Out on the street, a car door shut and someone laughed. Inside, the house stayed still. The phone buzzed once more, but I didn't move. The glow faded, leaving the room dim and quiet, except for the muted sounds of the neighborhood settling into night. The morning of the wedding broke heavy and humid, sunlight glinting off parked cars lining the street outside my window. I laced up my running shoes out of habit, but stopped halfway and untied them. Instead, I stood at the kitchen counter with a mug of coffee, staring out at the line of vehicles and suitcases. Relatives moved like ants between houses, their voices low, eyes glued to phones. From here it looked less like a celebration and more like a conference of confused travelers. I set the mug down and grabbed my jacket. No uniform, just jeans and a t-shirt. My phone buzzed constantly, but I didn't reach for it. Through the window, I caught sight of a rental van pulling away from the curb. Derek's parents inside, faces grim. The air carried a strange stillness, the kind before a storm breaks. Driving out to Maplewood Manor took less than 20 minutes. The GPS directed me down a tree-lined road to a gated estate. When I pulled in, the first thing I noticed was the silence. No string quartet warming up, no chatter of guests, no scent of flowers, just a bare hall visible through the open doors, rows of empty tables, and a staff member stacking unused chairs in the corner. I parked off to the side and stepped out. My boots crunched on gravel. The big white sign that had once read, "Reserved for Holt Lawson Wedding," had been taken down, leaving empty hooks. Inside, the ballroom looked stripped. No decorations, no cake, no centerpieces. The floor gleamed under the overhead lights, polished and empty. A handful of guests stood near the entrance whispering. One woman fanned herself with a program that listed a string quartet that never showed. Another muttered about flights and hotels. I passed by them quietly and moved closer to the main room. In the far corner, Vanessa paced in a rental gown, nothing like the crystal-studded dress she'd flaunted at the boutique. Her makeup was smudged, hair falling out of its style. She barked orders at a staffer, who kept shrugging and pointing at a clipboard. Our mother sat at a table clutching her phone, while Dad stood with his hands on his hips, jaw tight. I stayed back, leaning against a column, and watched. Vanessa spotted me and froze, her face twisting with fury. You ruined everything." Her scream turned heads. Conversations stopped, eyes swung toward us. She stormed across the floor in the too big rental dress, pointing at me. "This is your fault, all of it. You wanted to humiliate me. Well, congratulations." I didn't move. My voice stayed level. I paid for everything. When I stopped, this is what happened. A ripple of gasps moved through the guests. People glanced at each other, then back at Vanessa. A cousin whispered, "She paid?" Another muttered, "Serves her right." Vanessa spun toward our parents, expecting backup. They stayed silent. Diane's lips trembled, but no words came. Dad stared at the floor. The staffer stepped forward politely. "Miss Holt, without payment we cannot proceed with setup. We have other clients." Vanessa's face went pale. She grabbed at her mother's arm. "Mom, do something." No. Diane shook her head, eyes darting to me and then away. I straightened, my boots clicking on the floor as I stepped forward into the open space. The murmurs of the guests swelled behind me. "Vanessa has been living a fantasy," I said clearly. "She told everyone our parents were funding this wedding, but it was me. When she slapped me and treated me like dirt, I stopped. I gestured to the empty hall. This is the result. Met." The room went quiet except for the squeak of a chair as someone shifted. Several guests shook their heads. A few crossed their arms. One aunt muttered, "About time." Vanessa's hands balled into fists. "You're jealous," she hissed. "You've always been jealous. This was supposed to be my day. I didn't rise to it. You're right, it's your day, and now you're paying for it." A door opened at the back of the hall. Derek walked in with his parents, not dressed for a wedding but in a crisp dark suit, expression set. He looked around at the bare tables, the silent guests, the staff rolling carts away. Then his eyes landed on Vanessa. "I came here to tell everyone myself," he said loudly enough to carry. "The wedding is off. Vanessa lied to me, to my family, and to all of you. I won't marry someone who builds her life on deceit." The guests shifted, whispers rising like wind through leaves. Some looked shocked, others not at all. Derek's parents stood behind him, arms crossed. Vanessa stumbled toward him, voice breaking. "No, please, you don't understand, she's—" "I understand perfectly," Derek cut in. "I've seen the receipts, Corinne isn't lying, you are." Her mouth opened and closed without sound. The silence in the hall was heavier than the air outside. I didn't speak. I simply watched as Derek turned on his heel and walked out, his parents following. The echo of their footsteps filled the empty space. Around us, the wedding guests began to peel away in clusters, whispering, shaking heads, muttering about flights and refunds. Someone demanded their travel expenses back. Another said, "I knew something was off." Vanessa sank into a chair, face buried in her hands, shoulders shaking. Diane moved to comfort her, murmuring something. Dad stood rigid, then turned toward me, his glare sharp enough to cut. "This is on you," he snapped. "If you hadn't pulled your stunt, none of this would have happened." I met his eyes. "No, Dad. This happened because you and Vanessa took advantage of me. I paid for months without a word. I sacrificed my savings, my future to cover for her lies. And what did I get in return? A slap in the face. Literally." Relatives nearby nodded, having heard everything. Agreement flickered in their eyes. The weight of Dad's glare slipped off me like rain off a jacket. I turned slightly, taking in the empty hall again. The chairs stacked, the tables bare, the faint smell of floor polish replacing any trace of flowers. This was no longer my problem to solve. A staffer rolled a cart past, humming under his breath. Outside, a car engine started and faded. Inside, the murmurs continued, softer now, mixed with the scrape of chairs and the click of heels heading for the exit. I adjusted the strap of my bag on my shoulder. Vanessa still sat hunched over, Diane rubbing her back, Dad pacing. Around them, the wedding that had eaten my savings evaporated into a bare room and a scattering of disappointed guests. The hum of the air conditioning filled the silence left by the departing crowd. My boots felt solid on the polished floor as I shifted my weight, the faint echo carrying through the empty hall. I stayed where I was, the strap of my bag pressing against my shoulder, eyes on the cluster of relatives still standing by the doorway. The sound of chairs scraping and hushed voices filled the bare hall. Vanessa wiped at her face with a tissue, mascara streaking down her cheeks. Diane whispered in her ear, but Vanessa shook her head violently. Robert paced a tight circle, glancing at me like he wanted to spit but couldn't find the words. A few cousins were holding their phones up, pretending to check messages but clearly recording. An uncle cleared his throat, stepped forward a little, then stopped, as if unsure whose side to take. The staff stood at the back of the room waiting to see if anyone was going to sign a check or tell them to pack up. I walked closer until I stood a few feet from my family. My boots clicked softly on the floor. When I spoke, my voice carried, steady but loud enough for everyone to hear. I paid for everything you see on that program. The venue, the food, the dress, the flowers, it was all my money. And when I stopped paying, this is the result. Nobody interrupted. Heads turned as whispers rippled through the group. Someone near the back muttered, "I thought her parents were paying." Another said, "Guess not." I shifted my eyes to Vanessa. "You slapped me in public. You told me I didn't belong here. You used my army pay for your dream wedding and never once said thank you. This isn't jealousy. This is the bill coming due." Vanessa looked up from the tissue, her face blotchy. "You're cruel," she rasped. "You ruined me." I kept my tone flat. "I didn't ruin you. I stopped funding you." Robert took a step forward, voice rising. "We're family. Family helps each other. That's what you signed up for when you started sending money." I turned my head toward him. "No. Family respects each other. Family doesn't treat one person like an ATM while clapping for another. I've been deployed twice. I've put my life on the line and still came home and sent money for your bills and Vanessa's wedding. I've been helping for years. It stops now." The hall was silent except for the faint hum of the air conditioning. Diane's eyes flicked from me to Vanessa and back again, but she didn't speak. Several relatives nodded faintly, a few looking down at the floor. I straightened my shoulders. I'm cutting all financial ties. No more bills, no more payments, no more favors. You'll all have to stand on your own 2 feet, just like I've had to since I was 18. Someone in the back murmured, "Good for her." Another cleared his throat. A cousin pocketed her phone and crossed her arms. Vanessa's lip trembled. "You can't just walk away. You owe me. You said you'd help." "I helped," I said, "more than anyone ever should. This wedding, this mess, is yours to deal with now." Or, Diane reached out a hand as if to touch my arm but stopped short. "Corinne, please think about what you're doing. We can't recover from this disgrace." I glanced at her, the weight of her words sliding off me. "You call me selfish for stopping, but who's been selfish here? The one who paid for everything quietly, or the ones who used me without thanks?" She dropped her hand. Behind us, the staff began folding chairs, their movements quiet but deliberate. The sound of metal on wood echoed off the empty walls. A gust of air from the open door stirred the hem of Vanessa's rented dress. I adjusted the strap of my bag again, feeling its weight. "I'm leaving now. Handle your own contracts, handle your own bills, handle your own reputation." Vanessa let out a sob that turned into a choking sound. She clutched Diane's arm. Robert opened his mouth to speak but closed it again. I turned and walked toward the doorway. The relatives parted as I passed, some looking at me with something like respect, others with open curiosity. One aunt gave a small nod. As I reached the threshold, my phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out without breaking stride. The screen lit up with a message from my unit's admin. "Report to base. Ranger assessment confirmed. Please check in by scheduled date." I slid the phone back into my pocket. The sunlight outside was harsh after the dim hall. Cars lined the gravel drive, guests still milling about whispering. A staff member held the door for me without comment as I stepped out. The air smelled of pine and warm asphalt. A bird called from somewhere high in the trees. My boots crunched on the gravel as I walked back to my truck. Behind me, the voices in the hall rose and fell, a mix of pleading and muttering, but none of it pulled at me anymore. I unlocked the door, climbed in, and sat for a moment with my hands on the steering wheel. Through the windshield, I could see the empty sign hooks where the wedding banner had hung. A breeze moved through the trees, carrying the faint sound of chairs being stacked inside. I started the engine and pulled slowly down the long drive. Guests stood in small knots near their cars, watching but saying nothing. Some avoided eye contact, others stared openly. The gate swung open at the end of the lane. Beyond it, the road stretched back toward Charleston, heat shimmering above the asphalt. I rolled down the window and let the warm air blow across my face. In the side mirror, Maplewood Manor receded, the white facade bright against the green trees. The sound of the engine filled the cab, steady and familiar. I kept my eyes on the road, my hands steady on the wheel. The notification from my unit still glowed in my mind, clear and solid like a new landmark on a map. At a stop sign, I glanced left and right. No traffic. I turned onto the main road and headed toward town, the truck moving smoothly under me. My shoulders eased against the seat. The sky was high and blue, streaked with thin clouds. The smell of salt water drifted in from the marshes. My pulse matched the hum of the tires on the road. Farther down, a billboard for Fort Bragg appeared, Home of the Airborne, in bold letters. I passed it without slowing, the image of wings bright against the sky. A text came in, but I didn't look at it. My focus stayed on the road ahead, the wheel solid in my grip, the sun warming my arm through the open window. Traffic thinned as I left the estate behind. The city rose ahead in a blur of rooftops and church spires. My breathing stayed even, each mile carrying me farther from the noise and closer to something that felt like my own life. The highway opened wide in front of me as I drove north, pine trees sliding past on either side. The noise of the truck and the steady rhythm of the tires on asphalt felt like a barrier between me and everything that had just happened. I kept my window down, the warm air pushing through and carrying the smell of salt and resin. My phone lay silent on the seat, screen dark, no vibration cutting through the drive. At a rest stop outside Fayetteville, I pulled off and filled up the tank. The sight of soldiers in uniform grabbing snacks at the convenience store made me feel an odd sense of normalcy. I paid for my coffee, nodded at a couple of privates, who gave me a polite ma'am, and got back in the truck. The sun was high now, burning off the morning haze. The entrance to Fort Bragg appeared sooner than I expected. Passing under the big sign, Home of the Airborne, always stirred a small flicker in my chest. This time it felt steadier. The guard at the gate scanned my ID, recognized my unit, and waved me through with a crisp, "Welcome back, Sergeant Blake." Inside the base, life moved at its own rhythm. Soldiers jogging in formation, trucks hauling gear, flags snapping in the breeze. I parked near my barracks and sat for a moment, hands on the wheel, letting the engine idle. The sound of cadence calls floated over from a training field. I killed the engine, stepped out, and shouldered my duffel. The ground felt solid under my boots. Crossing the lot toward the admin building, I noticed how natural it felt to fall back into the pace of base life. People moving with purpose. No one yelling at me about floral arrangements or bounce checks. Inside, the air conditioning hit cool against my skin. I checked in at the desk, signed the papers confirming my early return from leave, and accepted a sealed envelope with my Ranger assessment packet. The clerk gave me a quick "good luck" before turning to the next soldier in line. No fuss, no drama, just paperwork and signatures. In the hallway, a few familiar faces nodded at me. One of my squad mates raised an eyebrow. "Thought you were on leave longer," he said. "Plans changed," I answered simply. He didn't ask more, just clapped me on the shoulder and moved on. I carried the packet to an empty conference room and sat down at a metal table. The envelope tore open easily. Inside were the training schedule, reporting instructions, gear list, and a small note at the bottom. "Congratulations on selection." I ran my thumb over the print, the letters solid under my skin. Pulling out a pen, I began checking off items on the gear list. Boots, ruck, hydration pack, gloves, everything I'd need for the first phase. My handwriting looked calmer than it had in weeks. From outside the door came the sound of laughter. Someone telling a story about a bad jump. I smiled faintly without looking up. Later, in my quarters, I unpacked what little I had brought from Charleston. Clothes, toiletries, a stack of unopened mail. I placed my cooking class pamphlet on the desk. The community college had confirmed my spot starting next month. For the first time, I'd be using my own money on something that was just for me. I hung my uniform neatly in the closet, boots lined under it, duffel stored on the shelf. The room smelled faintly of detergent and pine cleaner. I opened the small window to let in fresh air. Outside, soldiers were running the perimeter road, their cadence echoing. Sitting on the edge of the bed, I opened my phone. Dozens of messages had stacked up since I'd started driving. Vanessa, Mom, Dad, a few cousins. I scrolled without opening them. The previews told enough. Accusations, pleas, threats, apologies. The family group chat was a scroll of chaos. Photos from the empty venue mixed with angry texts about refunds and embarrassment. I closed the app and set the phone on the nightstand face down. The screen went dark, leaving only the muted light of the room. Standing, I crossed to the mirror and studied my reflection. No dress, no purse, no boutique. Hair pulled back, uniform at the ready, eyes steady. My cheek showed no trace of the slap. I picked up a notebook and began writing out my training plan for the next 2 weeks. Runs, ruck marches, gym work, range sessions. The pen moved smoothly over the paper. Each line I wrote felt like a brick set into a wall, clear and solid. At dinner in the chow hall, a few friends joined me. Conversation was easy, mostly about schedules, new assignments, who was rotating out. Nobody asked about Charleston. Nobody asked about weddings. We laughed about a mishap on a training jump last month. The food wasn't great, but it was hot and paid for by Uncle Sam, not me. Afterward, I walked the perimeter road as the sky turned orange and then purple. The air was cooler now. Flags clinked softly against their poles. A group of paratroopers jogged past, boots hitting the pavement in perfect rhythm. Their voices rose in cadence, sharp and clear. I matched my breathing to it for a few steps, feeling the ground solid beneath each footfall. Back in my quarters, I showered and changed into shorts and a t-shirt. The phone remained dark on the nightstand. I sat at the desk with the cooking class pamphlet again, reading about the first lesson knife skills, sauces, the basics. Something completely different from field rations and MRE heaters. I felt a small flicker of anticipation at the idea. I tucked the pamphlet back into a drawer and looked at the Ranger packet once more. The schedule started early. 0 dark, 30 muster, ruck march, land nav, PT. I imagined the sweat, the mud, the burn in my legs. All of it was mine, chosen freely. Outside, the sounds of base life settled into night. Trucks rumbled past. Someone called cadence one last time. A bugle played retreat faintly from across the field. I lay back on the bed, staring at the ceiling. The room felt cool and quiet. No floral invoices or bounce checks vibrating in my pocket. No one shouting about dresses. Just the hum of the air unit and the distant thump of a helicopter. My breathing slowed. My hands rested on my stomach, fingers loose. The weight on my chest that had sat there for months, the weight of secret payments, of constant guilt had lifted. There was only the steady sound of the bass at night and the knowledge that, in the morning, I'd be up before dawn preparing for something that belonged entirely to me. The glow of the hallway light slipped under the door. Somewhere down the hall, a soldier laughed. I closed my eyes for a moment, then opened them and stared at the Ranger packet again, the words crisp under the fluorescent light. I reached over, turned the packet face down, and shut off the lamp. The room went dim, except for the faint light from the open window. Outside, the night carried on, crickets chirping under the drone of distant engines, steady and unbroken. The alarm went off before sunrise. I swung my legs off the bed, feet hitting the cool floor, and reached for my running shoes. Outside the window, Fort Bragg was still dark except for a few security lights and the glow from the motor pool. I tied my laces, grabbed my hydration pack, and stepped into the hallway. Soldiers moved quietly, some heading to early PT, others to chow. No one stared. No one asked questions. The air outside was crisp, a hint of pine and damp earth. I jogged toward the track where a few paratroopers were already running. My stride fell into rhythm with theirs, breath steady, arms pumping. The sound of boots hitting asphalt, cadence echoing faintly across the field, felt like home. After a few miles, I slowed, wiped sweat from my forehead, and walked back toward the barracks as the first light of dawn spread across the sky. I showered quickly, changed into a clean uniform, and pinned my name tape straight. The mirror showed a face without strain. At breakfast in the chow hall, I sat with a couple of teammates. They talked about training rotations and upcoming jumps. I ate scrambled eggs and toast, nodding at the right spots, not needing to fill silence with explanations. No phone buzzing, no arguments. Just food, conversation, and the sound of trays sliding across metal counters. Later, in the admin building, I turned in the last piece of paperwork for the Ranger assessment. The clerk stamped it and handed me a copy. "You're all set," she said. "Good luck out there, Sergeant Blake." Her tone was brisk but respectful. I thanked her and stepped back into the sunlight. The base buzzed with normal activity, trucks hauling gear, soldiers heading to training, flags snapping in the breeze. I walked past the motor pool toward a quiet bench under a pine tree. Sitting down, I took out my phone. Messages still filled the screen. Vanessa, Mom, Dad, cousins. But the tone had shifted. Mixed in with accusations were apologies, awkward attempts at explanation, even a few relatives saying they admired me. I scrolled slowly, reading without responding. The group chat that once treated me like a silent ATM now read like a confession booth. I closed the app and opened my bank account instead. The balance sat there untouched, slowly climbing as my paycheck hit without being siphoned off. It wasn't a fortune, but it was mine. From my bag, I pulled out the pamphlet for the community college cooking class. The first session was knife skills, then sauces, then pasta. I pictured myself at a stainless steel counter, chopping vegetables, learning how to cook a meal not because someone else needed it, but because I wanted to. The sun broke fully over the trees, casting long beams across the grass. Soldiers jogged past in formation, their cadence echoing. I matched my breathing to it, steady and even. I thought about the slap at the boutique, the shock, the heat in my cheek, the sound of everyone pretending not to watch. That moment had felt like humiliation. Now it felt like a door that had swung open. I wasn't angry anymore. Anger took energy I didn't want to give. What remained was a clean boundary. My family's debts were theirs. My work, my savings, my choices were mine. I stood and walked back toward the barracks, the ranger packet tucked under my arm. Passing a group of new recruits, I caught a flash of recognition in one of their eyes. He straightened and nodded. "Ma'am." "Carry on," I said and kept walking. In my room, I sat at the desk, opened the packet, and reviewed the first week's schedule one more time. 0 Dark 30 muster, ruck march, land navigation, PT, all of it challenging, all of it chosen. I set the packet aside and picked up my phone again. A new message from an aunt popped up. "We're proud of you for standing up. Not easy, but right." I read it twice and felt a small, genuine smile pull at my mouth. For years, I'd carried the weight of other people's choices, thinking keeping the peace was more important than speaking up. But peace bought with silence isn't peace. It's control dressed up as love. I closed the phone and slipped it into my pocket. The room smelled faintly of detergent and fresh air from the open window. Outside, a helicopter thumped across the sky, fading into the distance. I grabbed my cap, slid it on, and stepped outside into the sunlight. The base stretched out before me, roads, training fields, soldiers moving with purpose. My boots hit the pavement with a steady rhythm. Each step felt like my own. The slap at the boutique could have broken me. Instead, it marked the day I stopped financing someone else's fantasy and started financing my own future. My sister lost her wedding, her fiancé, and her illusion. My parents lost their free ride. I gained something more valuable than money: freedom. As I crossed the parade ground, a breeze lifted the edges of my uniform. The sun was warm on my shoulders. My phone stayed quiet in my pocket. I walked on, heading toward the training field, the sound of cadence calls rising behind me, blending into the steady beat of my own footsteps.